The words that came out of his mouth weren't a plea for help. They were a mirror that showed 50 wealthy diners exactly who they'd become. And in that moment, every person in that restaurant realized they were one catastrophe away from standing where he stood. The crystal chandeliers of La Maison Dorée cast prismatic light across white tablecloths as the evening crowd settled into their Friday ritual. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. The smell of truffle risotto and seared duck mingled with expensive perfume. Everything was perfect, controlled, exactly as it should be. Then the door opened. A gust of November wind swept through the entrance, carrying with it the smell of rain and concrete. Every head turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The man who entered looked like he'd walked straight out of an alley, because he had. His coat, once perhaps brown or gray, was now an indeterminate color of street dirt and weather. His beard was matted, his shoes held together with duct tape. His hands, dark and weathered, trembled slightly as he stood in the doorway, water dripping from his clothes onto the polished marble floor. For 3 full seconds, the restaurant was silent except for the jazz piano that continued playing, oblivious to the rupture in the evening's carefully curated atmosphere. Marcus, the maitre d', moved first. His face flushed as he strode across the dining room, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the floor. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "I have money," the old man said. His voice was rough but steady. He reached into his coat pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "I'd like to buy a cup of coffee." Marcus's expression tightened. Behind him, a woman in pearls whispered something to her dinner companion. A man in a gray suit shook his head slowly, as if witnessing something distasteful but predictable. "Sir, this is not that kind of establishment," Marcus said, his voice low but carrying across the hushed room. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The old man didn't move. His eyes, surprisingly clear and bright despite the wreckage of his appearance, scanned the room. He looked at the families eating together, the couples laughing over wine, the businessmen celebrating with cigars and cognac. "I have money," he repeated, holding out the 20 with both hands now, as if it were an offering. "I just want a cup of coffee. And maybe some bread, if you have it." A young server, barely out of high school, started forward with a sympathetic expression, but the restaurant manager, Derek, cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Marcus is right," Derek said, positioning himself beside the maitre d'. "We have health codes, dress codes. This is a 5-star establishment. You need to leave, or I'll have to call the police." The old man's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered across his face, not anger, but something deeper. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of a pattern he'd seen too many times before. "Please," he said quietly. "It's cold outside. I've been walking all day. I just need—" "I don't care what you need," Derek interrupted, his voice rising now, emboldened by the approving nods he saw around the room. "You're disrupting my customers. You're making people uncomfortable. You need to leave now." The old man stood his ground, though his body swayed slightly, exhausted. "I'm a paying customer," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I have money. You're refusing to serve me. Don't make this difficult," Marcus warned, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police right now." "Let him call them," a voice rang out from table 7. A man in an expensive suit raised his wine glass as if making a toast. "We don't need this here. We're trying to have a nice dinner with our families." A murmur of agreement rippled through the dining room. "Absolutely ridiculous," a woman muttered, pulling her designer handbag closer as if the old man might lunge for it. "This is exactly what's wrong with this city," another diner added, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They're everywhere now. Aggressive panhandlers. Someone needs to do something." The old man's eyes moved from face to face. He seemed to be memorizing them, cataloging each expression of disgust, fear, and righteous indignation. "I'm not panhandling," he said clearly. "I'm trying to buy coffee." "With what?" "That dirty 20 you probably stole." Derek shot back. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and naked. The young server, whose name tag read James, looked stricken. He glanced at his manager, then at the old man, conflict written across his face. But he said nothing. Like everyone else, he was frozen, waiting to see how this would play out. The old man's shoulders sagged slightly. He looked down at the $20 bill in his hands, crumpled, worn, but real. Legal tender. The same currency that had bought every meal in this restaurant for the past 30 years it had been operating. You know what I see when I look around this room? The old man said, his voice quieter now, but somehow carrying further. I see people spending more on one meal than I've seen in a month. I see wine that costs more than I used to make in a week. And I see people who've forgotten something important. We don't need a lecture from, Derek began, but the old man kept talking, his voice steady and clear. I see people who think they're different from me, better than me, safer than me. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room. But let me tell you something about the distance between where you're sitting and where I'm standing. That's enough, Marcus said, moving to take the old man's arm. You're leaving now. It's thinner than you think, the old man continued, not resisting but not moving either. A lot thinner than you think. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the couple who'd been whispering had stopped. The jazz continued in the background, a saxophone playing a mournful melody that seemed to underscore the tension. You think you're immune, the old man said. You think your money, your clothes, your tables at fancy restaurants. You think these things protect you from becoming what I am. But I sat where you're sitting once. I wore suits like yours. I ate meals that cost more than what I'm asking for right now. Everyone's got a sob story, the man in the gray suit called out. Doesn't give you the right to come in here and disrupt. 7 years ago, the old man interrupted, his voice cutting through the objection like a knife. I owned a construction company, had 40 employees, built half the buildings in this neighborhood, including the office tower 3 blocks from here. My wife and I celebrated our 25th anniversary in a restaurant just like this one. The room shifted. Faces that had been certain moments before now looked uncertain. Then she got sick, the old man continued. His hands had stopped shaking. His voice was clear, controlled, and devastatingly calm. Cancer. Stage 4. The medical bills came first, mountains of them, more than insurance would cover. Then came the second mortgage. Then came the business loans I couldn't make when I spent every day at the hospital instead of managing job sites. Then came the bankruptcy. Then came the foreclosure. Then came her funeral, which I paid for by selling everything we had left. The silence in the restaurant was absolute now. The jazz had stopped. Even the kitchen sounds had faded. And then the old man said, his voice barely above a whisper, I spent 6 months so deep in grief, I couldn't function. Lost my apartment, lost my car, lost contact with friends who didn't know how to handle my falling. And then I learned what it means to be invisible. He looked directly at Derek, then at Marcus, then let his gaze drift across the room, meeting eyes that could no longer quite meet him. You see me now because I'm causing a scene, he said, but I've walked past this restaurant every single day for 3 years. I stood outside that window. He pointed to the large glass window that looked out onto the street and watched people eating. And you know how many times someone inside has looked at me? Really looked at me, like I'm a person and not just scenery. He paused. 0. Not once. I'm invisible until I'm inconvenient. A woman at table 4 had tears streaming down her face. Her husband had gone pale. James, the young server, was openly crying. But here's the thing that really got me, the old man continued. And now there was something in his voice that wasn't anger or bitterness, but something closer to wonder. Today is November 15th. 7 years ago today, my wife Mary and I celebrated our last anniversary together. Right before the diagnosis. We went to a restaurant like this one. We ordered the best wine. We laughed. We made plans for retirement. He looked down at the $20 bill still clutched in his hands. I've been saving this 20 for months, he said. Collecting cans, doing odd jobs when I can get them. I've been saving it because I wanted to do something to mark today. I want to sit in a warm place and drink a cup of coffee and remember when I was someone who could celebrate anniversaries in restaurants like this. I wanted to feel human again, just for an hour. The old man's eyes, bright and clear, swept across the room one more time. I wasn't trying to steal from you, he said quietly. I wasn't trying to disrupt your dinners or make your children uncomfortable. I just wanted 1 hour when I wasn't invisible. 1 hour when I could sit in a warm room and remember who I used to be. He held out the $20 bill toward Derek. But you're right, he said. This isn't for people like me anymore. This is for people who haven't lost everything yet. People who still think they're safe. Before Derek could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the dining room. Wait! An older man stood up from table 12. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the old man's construction company made in a month at its peak. He walked slowly across the dining room, his footsteps the only sound, until he stood face to face with the homeless man. For a long moment, they looked at each other. I know you, the silver-haired man said finally. His voice was thick with emotion. You're Samuel Harris. You built my first office building in 2009, the Henderson Medical Plaza. The old man, Samuel, blinked, confusion crossing his face. You probably don't remember me, the silver-haired man continued. I was just starting out as a property developer. Young, cocky, thought I knew everything. The project was going over budget, and I was panicking. You sat me down in your construction trailer and spent 3 hours walking me through every line item, showing me where we could save money, where we couldn't cut corners. You refused to take a bonus when we finished under budget. Said it was the right thing to do. Samuel's face had gone still. A tremor ran through his body. That building was the foundation of everything I built after, the silver-haired man said. 27 medical buildings across 3 states. And it started because you took the time to teach a kid who didn't know what he was doing. The man turned to face the restaurant. This man, he said, his voice rising and clear, built half this neighborhood. He employed families. He paid fair wages. He built buildings that are still standing, still solid, still sheltering people. And we were about to throw him out in the cold because we couldn't see past his clothes. He turned to Derek and Marcus. Give him a table. Give him the best table in the house. And whatever he orders, it's on me, along with every other person in here who wants to join him. The transformation was immediate and stunning. James rushed forward with a clean towel and a glass of water. A woman from table 7 brought over her husband's suit jacket, warm and dry. The man in the gray suit who'd been complaining loudest pulled out his wallet and approached silently, pressing several bills into Samuel's hand before walking back to his seat without a word. Within minutes, Samuel was seated at the best table in the house, by the window he'd looked through for 3 years. A cup of coffee steamed in front of him. Then came bread, warm from the oven. Then soup. Then the chef himself emerged from the kitchen with a plate of the house specialty, herb-crusted lamb that Samuel hadn't ordered but that appeared nonetheless, a gift from a kitchen that had been complicit in turning him away. The silver-haired man sat across from Samuel. James hovered nearby, attentive and eager to help in any way he could. And slowly, one by one, other diners approached. Some apologized. Some said nothing, just pressed money or business cards into Samuel's hand. A woman who ran a homeless shelter gave him her information. A man who owned a small construction firm offered him consulting work. But Derek and Marcus stood frozen by the host's stand, their faces pale, watching the entire restaurant reorganize itself around the man they tried to eject. Samuel ate slowly, savoring every bite. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks into his matted beard, but he didn't wipe them away. He just ate and drank his coffee and looked out the window at the street where he'd been invisible for so long. The silver-haired man didn't talk much. He just sat there, bearing witness, ensuring by his presence that Samuel wouldn't be asked to leave again. As the evening wore on and the dining room slowly emptied, Samuel finally pushed back from the table. He was clean now, having washed his hands and face in the restaurant bathroom. His clothes were still worn, but someone had given him a new coat. His pockets held more than $500 in cash and at least a dozen business cards. But more than that, his face had changed. The exhaustion was still there. The marks of years on the street wouldn't disappear in one evening. But something else had returned to his expression, a kind of dignity that no one could give or take away, only recognize or fail to recognize. James helped him to the door. The young server's eyes were still red from crying. "I'm sorry," James whispered. "I should have said something earlier. I should have." Samuel put a weathered hand on the young man's shoulder. "You're young," he said gently. "You're learning. That's enough." He paused. But remember this feeling. Remember that everyone you meet is carrying something you can't see. And the distance between serving someone and being the one who needs to be served is not as far as you think. James nodded, unable to speak. Samuel turned to leave, then stopped. He looked back at Derek and Marcus, who still stood by the host stand, looking lost. "I forgive you," Samuel said simply. "I know how easy it is to forget that invisible people are still people. I did it too, before I became one. The real question is what you do now that you remember." Then he walked out into the November night, the door closing softly behind him. The next morning, La Maison Dorée had a new policy posted on its front door. No person will be refused service based on appearance. Every human being deserves dignity, warmth, and recognition. We are all closer to needing grace than we think. Below it, in smaller letters, in memory of Mary Harris, and in honor of her husband Samuel, who taught us what we should have already known. The policy wasn't posted because Derek ordered it. He'd quit during the night, unable to face what he'd almost done. Marcus had submitted his resignation by email at 3 in the morning. It was posted by the owner of La Maison Dorée, who'd been called by the silver-haired man and told the story, who'd wept over the phone at what had happened in his restaurant, who'd stayed up all night thinking about the invisible people he walked past every day without seeing. And it was posted because sometimes it takes breaking the spell of our carefully maintained worlds to remember that those worlds are fragile, temporary, and separated from chaos by nothing more than luck and grace. Samuel never came back to La Maison Dorée, but he didn't need to. The people who'd been there that night, they carried his story with them. They told it to their children. They told it at dinner parties. They told it to strangers on the street who looked away from homeless people as if not seeing them made them less real. And slowly, person by person, the invisible became visible again. Not all of them, not everywhere, but enough to matter. Enough to prove that the distance between ignoring someone and seeing them is just one moment of recognition. One choice to remember that we're all human. One decision to believe that the difference between us and them is luck, not merit. One cup of coffee's worth of grace in a world that has forgotten how to offer it. And that, in the end, was worth more than any meal at any table in any restaurant anywhere. The memory that we're all just people trying to stay warm, trying to be seen, trying to hold on to our dignity in a world that makes it so easy to lose. The jazz band still plays at La Maison Dorée. The crystal chandeliers still cast their prismatic light. The truffle risotto still costs $45 a plate. But now, sometimes, there's an empty chair at the best table by the window. The staff leaves it vacant for an hour each evening at the same time. Not because Samuel asked for it, but because they need to remember that there's always room at the table for one more. That we're all one disaster, one illness, one terrible stroke of luck away from needing that chair ourselves. And that the measure of a place or a person isn't how well they serve the comfortable, but whether they remember to save a seat for those who need one most.